the fact that Mr. Oakhax was dragging a claw, and from the dangled claw dangled a mouse, greatly got in the way of his flying. His flight path became increasingly wild. In his desperate desire to rid himself of pain, Mr. Oakhax ceased to look where he was even heading. Violently, he plunged toward the cornfield. Once over it, he lowered his left claw, and that meant Poppy, deliberately thumping it, and he was thumping her along the corn stalks in the hope that the quill would be jerked out. Poppy was being battered, but each time she decided to release her hold on the quill, the owl surged forward, causing her to cling to it some more. Knowing she could not take much more, Poppy tried to see ahead. Mr. Oakhax was skimming low over the corn tops, but when he passed beyond them, he dropped toward the ground. "Let go," Poppy told herself. "Let go." But she was feeling so groggy, her own muscles wouldn't even respond. Then she saw what the owl was aiming for, the salt lick, and he was picking up speed. In his madness, he was preparing to strike his claw on the giant salt lick. In his madness, Poppy had wits enough to sense that if she struck that salt hard enough, it would be the end for her. Let go, she cried to herself. This time, she did. Down she plummeted. As she did, Mr. Oakhax first rose, then dropped, totally out of control. He slammed into the salt lick head on. So great was the blow that the salt shattered, while the owl went tumbling head over tail in an explosion of feathers. After 3 flips, he flopped down like a sack of potatoes onto the ground. And as for Poppy, she had landed on the grass. For a moment, she lay there stunned, battered, and confused. She looked up into the sky but saw nothing. Then she looked across the lawn. She saw him then. Mr. Oakhax lay on his back, perfectly still. His claws were drawn up over his chest, slightly curled. The quill was still stuck out of the left one. Scattered among all the feathers were chunks of salt. Here's a picture, boys and girls, to show you. Here's a picture. Poppy stumbled to her feet. She took a wobbly step or two toward the cornfield. Then she stopped and looked back. Mr. Oakhax had not moved. She stared at him. Slowly, not sure if she should believe what she was thinking, she crept closer to the fearsome owl. After every few steps, she paused, looked, and sniffed. Still, there was no movement. Close to Mr. Oakhax's head now, Poppy stopped again. The owl's great eyes opened wide, were open wide, and were staring up into the sky. His devil-like tufts of feathers were bent. His beak was open, and as Poppy watched, it snapped listlessly. "Mr. Oakhax?" No answer. She took a step closer. I don't know, boys and girls. "Mr. Oakhax?" His head turned slightly. For a moment, his eyes seemed to focus on her. "Sometimes," he murmured, "sometimes I wonder why I bother to protect you." With that, his beak made a final clack shut. His eyes closed, and Poppy knew it then. Mr. Oakhax was no longer alive. Stay tuned, boys and girls, for the next chapter.